Monday, the 8th of March, 1965, and 3,500 Marines land on the beaches of Da Nang, the first American combat troops to set foot in Vietnam. By the end of the year, they would be joined by another 200,000 more. The battalion came ashore in... They used 20 million gallons of it to turn the jungle below into a wasteland, into a moonscape, to destroy the communists' invisibility and expose them to the all-seeing attacking helicopters.
We shall not be aggressors, but we and our allies have and will maintain a massive capability to strike back.
President, have you ever had any reason to doubt this so-called domino theory? I believe it. I think that the struggle is close enough. China is so large, looms so high on the, just beyond the frontiers. If South Vietnam went, it would not only give them an improved geographic position for a guerrilla assault on Malaya, it would also give the impression that the way of the future in Southeast Asia is China and the communists.
I don't think that the true Australian wants safety on the cheap, nor does he want to leave everything to other people. It's abundantly clear that Australia must be prepared to do its share. And I'm perfectly certain that that will be agreeable to Australian opinion.
Renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the
load of troops and equipment slipped quietly out of harbour on the first stage of its long voyage to South Vietnam. And with its departure, the commitment of Australia to the war going on there began in earnest.
There were interminable classes. My recollection is most of them were health classes. It was, identification of the enemy and health classes. For God's sake, stay away from the women up there because there's strains of VD and gonorrhea you would not believe.
Take him to the nearest hospital or the head hospital if necessary. That was a big morale booster for the troop on the ground because he knew darn well if he got...
In 1965, the RAN was again at war, this time in Vietnam. HMAS Sydney, the Vung Tau ferry, was now being used as a troop transport, landing Australian troops and their equipment in South Vietnam. RAN destroyers, operating with the Americans, became part of the gun line providing fire support for ground forces.
We had two basic roles in the Tonkin Gulf. One was for naval gunfire support, supporting the ARVN troops from the US Marine Corps south of the demilitarized zone. And then we went on the interdiction role in the Sea Dragon operation north of the demilitarized zone.
600, all right, for that being 726, 4800. Okay, this is the same one. Approximately 3,600.
we had gained a great deal of confidence in the ship from her performance during the shakedown. And then to put that training experience together with these modern weapon systems into action in an actual combat situation, of course, and achieving good results, knowing that your guns were going to shoot accurately at long range, is a tremendous confidence builder in a ship's company. It gives you something which you can never get any other way, unfortunately, and consequently your job satisfaction in modern day terms is very high.
In the air, the RAN was asked to supply a helicopter flight for support of ground operations. The RAN pilots and crew became part of the US Army's 135th Assault Helicopter Company.
We were in the front line every day, just about. We worked 7 days a week, all through the year. And wherever the action was natural that we would be involved in it, since we were taking the infantry to where their objectives were, and if there's anybody there, we were involved in it.
It was quite an amazing sensation to walk from known places here in Nowra onto a Qantas 707 and step out into the steamy conditions in Tonsanut and Saigon to be there for, and then picked up again and taken out to our air base, which we operated from, which was the Thai Division headquarters. If that transition wasn't bad enough, virtually the next day you'd be co-piloting an aeroplane in a formation of 10 troop-carrying aircraft, accompanied by 4 gunships and a command and control aeroplane, carrying soldiers down in the Mekong Delta. Then, quick as a flash, people would be starting shooting and you'd start to realise, holy smoke, this is a shooting war out here. And the realisation of that suddenly sinks in, and it really gives you some...
Many of the ex-servicemen attending this evening's meeting served aboard the HMAS Sydney during the Vietnam War. The vessel made 22 trips to South Vietnam, providing supplies and logistical support.
Our services have not been recognised by former defence departments and governments, and we are here tonight to unite this as a fighting front to gain these benefits.
The veterans say the government denied them war service benefits because it claims they weren't allotted special duties and weren't in continuous danger. However, that's something the men dispute, and they've produced previously classified naval intelligence documents which suggest the HMAS Sydney was under threat of enemy attack.
We had armed sentries patrolling around the ship. We were dropping charges over the side to scare off enemy divers. We had helicopter gunships flying overhead to ensure that we weren't attacked by any hostile aircraft.
The veterans are now pinning their hopes for war service entitlements on a test case due to be heard in the High Court. Malcolm Martin, a former butcher aboard the Sydney, plans to take the federal government to court and settle the matter once and for all.
A group of Australian veterans of the Vietnam War is stirring up something of a hornet's nest in their efforts to secure war service benefits. The men served aboard HMAS Sydney, which was used to ferry supplies to Vietnam. But successive Australian governments have ruled that their missions weren't dangerous enough to warrant entitlement to service benefits. Well, Mark Jennings has been having a look at the veterans case, and he's come up with evidence that those missions were dangerous and even officially regarded so at the time.
HMAS Sydney played a central role in the Australian war effort. It took our first troops to Vietnam and brought the last home. It also carried hundreds of army vehicles, guns and helicopters. All up, the Sydney made 22 voyages to the war zone, but when the war service benefits were handed out, the men who sailed her were given the cold shoulder.
We've been treated with utter contempt since 1972. Servicemen serving in the forces for more than 3 years have been acknowledged for the Defence Services Homes alone. We risked our lives and got nothing.
Dennis Gist is spokesman for a group of 400 HMAS Sydney veterans who want the decision reversed. Gist and the others were excluded because the government of the day deemed that the Sydney was not in Vietnamese waters for operational duty, and there was no continuing danger from enemy forces.
The men aboard the HMAS Sydney and other naval vessels certainly thought we were in danger. We were closed up at action stations en route to South Vietnam. We had our escort destroyer. We had the HMAS Melbourne flying submarine reconnaissance work with her Wessex anti-submarine helicopters. Furthermore, the Royal Australian Air Force committed a detachment out of the Philippines, number 10 Squadron, which were flying anti-submarine missions all the way en route to South Vietnam. If they didn't think we were in danger, why did they go to all this expense and bother?
10 Squadron were in the Philippines on an exercise when its Neptune bombers were sent to escort HMAS Sydney. The Defence Department says this too was an exercise and the planes never flew over Vietnamese waters. Peter McLean, a former flight sergeant who flew the mission, says the department is not telling the truth.
Yes, the aircraft was armed. The aircraft had inside this bomb bay here, which is quite a long bomb bay, we had Mark 44 aerial torpedoes which had the capability of destroying any submarine that was around at that particular time.
What were your orders?
Our orders were we were to fly anti-submarine escort for the fleet consisting of HMAS Sydney, HMAS Melbourne, plus other surface craft, and conduct their safety right into Vietnam, right into Vung Tau Harbour. Yes.
McLean says he's come forward because he's no longer bound by secrecy provisions and feels the Neptune crews, like the men on HMAS Sydney, are entitled to war service benefits. But according to successive governments, neither group served in a theatre of war.
Of course we were in a theatre of war. All hell was breaking loose while we were in South Vietnam. The Royal Australian Navy and the United States Navy maintained naval bombardments of Viet Cong enemy positions within the Vung Tau, South Vietnam region. US naval patrol boats were machine gunning flotsam and objects in the water believed to be Viet Cong divers. In addition, we dropped scare charges over the side, and the Australian clearance diving team were clearing for mines 24 hours a day. If that's not being in a dangerous area, then what is? It certainly wasn't Guy Fawkes Night.
During the war, Australian and US destroyers pounded onshore targets. The men that served on these ships qualified for war service. But were they at more risk than the men on the Sydney, which sat anchored in Vung Tau as her cargo was ferried ashore? Documents obtained by the National under the Freedom of Information Act make it quite clear that the Navy, for one, thought HMAS Sydney was in some considerable danger. Secret naval intelligence documents described her as a tempting target and advised that she spend as little time as possible in Vung Tau. During the war, the Viet Cong attacked Vung Tau with rockets. Mines were found in the water and 2 Viet Cong sampans were ambushed. Still, this hasn't budged governments, which could end up having to part with $5 million.
During the period of the Vietnam War and its duration, it was a very unpopular war for many. But since then, there's been a softening over the last 10 years, and we hope that now with the softening and better understanding internationally that we will be recognised for our claim and the government will consider us.
Mark Jennings reporting, and we understand that the Defence Department in Canberra is about to reconsider the veterans' case for war service entitlements.
Always walking along, reflected in the St Kilda Road Lake.
Life services, which today are led by Major General John Stevenson.
For the oldest Anzac marcher and the newest. As Leslie Faulkner reports, the first Anzac centenarian was pounding the streets in Canberra, while in Melbourne, a group of Vietnam veterans were taking part in their first ever parade.
There were 21 World War I diggers showing their stamina to Canberra spectators. Amongst them was the first 100-year-old Anzac, who survived fighting in front of their first Anzac Day breakfast. 2 weeks ago, the crew of HMAS Sydney and other support personnel won a 20-year battle to be recognised as Vietnam veterans and receive post-war benefits. However, the victory is only just starting to make up for the years of being forgotten.
When you were watching a lot of your colleagues, Army, Navy and Air Force marching, and the feeling was, gee, I wish I could be there marching with the boys.
So how does it feel to be ready to go today?
We feel very honoured and very happy that we're marching today, and in fact all our branches around Australia are participating in the Anzac Day in their capital city.
And march they did, proud to be officially remembered and remembering Vietnam.